Testing, testing. We are ready. Yes.
And the video? Okay.
Yes, but we should have two, so we are missing one. We should have two of one, so we're missing one.
Just one.
Jääkö se noin pieneksi toi kuva tuolla? Pyytää esipaikkaa ton pois ja laittaa sen ison. Kello on puoli. Eikö me olla nyt suomalaisen tässä? Niin paljon kello on puoli. Meidän. Mutta mikä se on sen toisen puhujan kanssa tilanne? Se ei ole vastannut mihinkään viesteihin, niin ilmeisesti sit vaan improvisoida. Se oli se Welcome to join our discussion on carbon catchers. And let's see if we have still few people joining here. And I think we are missing also one panelist. But welcome everyone. We are exploring on this session how buildings can be really carbon catchers and resource banks. And it kind of fits very well with today's theme here in the COP27 Buildings Pavilion, which is connected to this. My name is Johanna Pirinen. I'm heading sustainability in Stora Enso Wood Products Division, and I'm really happy to be here hosting our panel or fireplace chat discussion today. And hopefully we will get our final panelists still to join us soon. And today, the Buildings Pavilion theme is buildings as resource banks instead of resource sinks. And we really want to highlight that the existing solutions are already available for this. So even we are kind of, quite terrified with the challenge of climate change that we have and where we are built environment, it's really important that we keep the optimism and show the solutions that are there already so that we could keep the 1.5 target still alive. And the latest report that came last week from the UNEP, basically, the 2022 Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction, published on 9th last week, was quite actually depressing reading. The progress that we thought last time that we are making is not really there. So the built environment continues to contribute for nearly 40%, 37% of the global energy-related emissions. So it's kind of clear that something needs to be done, and urgently, and now. So we are here today to discuss buildings as solutions. We are exploring different areas on this. And hopefully at the end you can also join the discussion here. So we are planning to run about 45 minutes discussion and dialogue, and then open up for questions and comments from the audience here in the COP27. And shall we then get our virtual panelists also visible? So if you can connect the Zoom here. Wonderful, and welcome everyone. So this is our panel for today. And I would like everyone to introduce themselves and the company they represent. So I would hand over to Hugo first.
Thank you, Johanna. My name is Yuko Izuka, Head of Sustainability at Sumitomo Forestry, based in Tokyo, Japan. So it's 7:30 p.m., but good afternoon to you. Sumitomo Forestry's history goes back to 330 years ago, and then when the Sumitomo family started the copper mine operation, and then we were sourcing timber for construction material and also for fuel for smelting the copper. But then after 200 years or so, that from too much harvesting and also from the air pollution, the surrounding mountains was devastated. It's a degraded, it's an almost like naked mountain. And so in 1894, which is like 130 years ago, and we started to replanting the forest to make it a green nature. So we already do have a history of this nature restoration and how this circularity and then the continuity and sustainability is really important for the business and for environment and for people in the region. So that's who we are. And then for the more modern history, that we do operate and we do construct wooden detached houses here in Japan and also Australia and US, about 20,000 units per year. And also that in the past 10 years that we are sort of trying to develop non-residential wooden structure, started in Japan about 10 years ago, and then we are trying to expand the possibility. So when we first started that, wooden structure is more towards, it feels nice and then it looks beautiful. But now that we do know that how this, wooden structure can contribute to for the low carbon economy or the carbon neutral society, that and we do have even more reason to push the movement and development of non-residential mass timber wooden construction. So I'm really happy that I was invited here for today's session, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuko. And did I understand correct? I'm not sure if you mentioned that you are heading the sustainability function in and.
Oh yes, I'm head of the sustainability, and then I'm really trying hard to push the whole organization to move forward for the carbon neutral society and also for the nature positive business. And we have the whole group towards this mission of making the carbon neutral society. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And then over to Marianne here.
Thank you, Johanna. So my name is Marianne Tikkanen. I come from a company called Puro.Earth, and I admire your Japanese company's hundreds of years of history. Our company is 3 years old, a startup that started in an empty space when there were no certifications or crediting for carbon removals. And that's our mission, to make carbon removals economically interesting and viable, so that more and more carbon is taken from atmosphere and stored in durable storages. And if I may, the difference between carbon removal and storage compared to emission allowance or emission reduction in emission allowance and emission reduction, the companies or activities are still emitting. They are emitting less, but there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, whereas we find activities where carbon is drawn down from atmosphere and then put to a durable storage and kept there. So the counteraction of fossil emissions is the carbon crediting content that we do. And we have been in operation 3.5 years now, and we have certified hundreds of tons of already happened carbon removal. So this is really doable. It's a business that is emerging with big steps. We had 5 times growth last year. So if this pace keeps us up, we can do a lot in the remaining 6 years of the carbon budget and beyond.
Wonderful to hear. And then I would like to give the word to Balsam.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. So my name is Balsam Nami. I'm the head of sustainability for DAR, also known as Dar al-Handasa. We are an international architecture and engineering consultancy with presence across the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, Americas, and Asia as well. In our work, we're focused on providing thought leadership on sustainability issues in the regional as well as the international scales. We are in support of global targets for environmental sustainability, and we pioneer high performance design in the region and elsewhere in the world. We have committed last year to getting our own operations to net zero by 2030, and part of our commitment is advocacy for whole life carbon net zero, where the most important focus for us is really to advocate the importance of reduced embodied carbon and net zero materials carbon as we move forward to all our clients and all the communities that we can influence. Just a little bit about DAR. So we are present in 60 countries around the world with 297 offices and about 20,000 employees scattered. We are focused on the energy transformation, the urban transformation, the mobility transformation, and the digital transformation. And as a consultancy, we are structured to solve the challenging problems with unconventional, innovative thinking towards a net zero future to assist in climate mitigation and getting the targets. We've done our commitment to align with this. We're aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we're strong advocates of low embodied carbon and of a whole life carbon net zero carbon approach. Thank you.
Wonderful to hear. And I'm myself representing Stora Enso, and we are a company in bioeconomy, providing biomaterials, packaging materials, these kind of nature-based solutions that are replacing fossil-based materials. And this wood products division that I'm representing is providing mass timber solutions for construction. So really part of the value chain. So as you can see in this panel, we have nicely the whole value chain represented. Not connected to each other business-wise, but I thought that it was super important to get this panel together to give perspective and really talk about the different elements that we see and how we can really push the decarbonization of built environment faster. And then we could start exploring the topics that we wanted to discuss today. And this is really truly a discussion. So also all the panelists, please shout out or raise your hand when there is something you want to comment or ask from each other. But if we would start with the kind of buildings design, when we're talking about buildings, and knowing that over half of the world's population lives in cities, according to UN Habitat, cities consume nearly 80%, 78% of the world's energy. And that really is something that could be looked at. And Balsam, you already mentioned the whole life carbon and embodied emissions, so we know that this has connection to it. And we know that we cannot really reduce the carbon footprint by focusing only on the embodied, no operational emissions and what can be done there, but we really need to look at this embodied and also the carbon storage element. but if I would first give the word on this front to Sumitomo Forestry and Yuko, so I know you are promoting carbon neutral design in your operations, so could you elaborate a bit more on that one?
Right, thank you, Johanna. And also just mentioned about embodied carbon and how the whole life cycle carbon neutrality is important for the building. And then at the very beginning, Johanna introduced about the 37% of the global GHG emission comes from the construction sector, and about 30% of that construction sector comes from embodied carbon, and the rest of the 70% are from the operational carbon. So if I may take the view to Japan, that Japan is really known for the wooden structure, and then but when it comes to non-residential buildings, that's only 10% is constructed by wood. So we really believe that, and in addition to the detached houses, but for the non-residential structure, that we have a huge opportunity and also responsibility to turn into a more wooden structure. But even though Bao-san mentioned that DAR has activities in 60 countries, but here in Japan, that embodied carbon is not embedded into the building code or the subsidies or any certification. So mostly when we always talk about this, energy efficiency, not carbon neutrality. So when you talk about energy efficiency, that's the focus is always towards operational carbon. So all the certifications or subsidies or all these schemes are focusing has been focused on the operational carbon. So we at Sumitomo Forestry really believe that it's very important for the wooden structure to be valued even more. So in order to do that, we need to show to our customers or the developers or building owners that how this embodied carbon is an important part of this, our journey towards carbon neutrality. And then because there is no building code or subsidies or the certification system that does talk about embodied carbon. So we are now trying to promote this embodied carbon concept in Japan in the past 2 years. And in order for the developers or building owners to understand what's this embodied carbon and how much it means for the carbon neutrality, that we are trying to visualize for the life cycle assessment. So we are now we are sole distributor of one-click LCA here in the Japanese market since this January, and then we just had a big conference here in Tokyo and with the CEO of one-click LCA presented in Tokyo, and then about 200 participants are really keen to learn what is this one-click LCA and how it can be used for the calculation of the buildings. And also that we, at the same time, we are trying to persuade partners for the upstream and downstream for both, that how the EPD, environmental product declaration, that how this environmental label for each construction materials can enable for the building owners or the developers or the subcontractor to choose the right material to make the whole life cycle of building to be closer to carbon neutral. So we are trying to talk to the upstream business partners for the introduction of EPD, and for the downstream users, we are trying to advocate that how they can try to how they can contribute to build a lower carbon buildings. That's what we are trying to do. So because we have a forest operation of our own, and also we do trade and also manufacture wooden buildings materials, and then actually constructing structure. So we have from the upstream to downstream, and then we have many business partners in both ends. So I think we are really in a good position to try to change and influence the Japanese society. So that's what we've been doing in the past 2 years and trying really hard now. Thank you.
And I'm extremely happy to hear that somebody is reading the environmental product declarations, because we have had them available for quite some time, and it is super important that they are science-based and really done based on the life cycle analysis. So that is very heartwarming to hear. And of course the EPD, if you haven't looked at the environmental product declarations, it also shows the product handprint, if the product has a handprint, which kind of then takes it to the carbon storage discussion, because it's there. But Marianne, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I actually had a question, Jukka, to you. You used the word embodied carbon. I would like you to define it, because there is still very much confusion in how we name these things. Is embodied carbon same as carbon storage, or is it something different?
Okay, and as far as I understand that, embodied carbon is versus for the operational carbon. So if you try to build something, that you first have to extract the raw material and then make it into building construction materials, and then to transfer or and then to process and actual construction. And then you can live in the building. So for the usage of the building, that's the operational carbon. And when you have to renovate or that's in the end of life, that if you abolish the building, that's the embodied carbon. So carbon storage, Johanna, I understand that carbon storage and embodied carbon is a slightly different concept, but but it's very important to see the upstream of construction parts, that how you extract the raw material and then a process and then actual construction. That's the most important thing that we can change now by 2030. Because the wood material is already there, so we can choose and use to construct the wooden structure. That's already here as a solution.
Thank you.
If I play it back to you, so embodied carbon is more embodied carbon emissions, not the embodied carbon storage. So all the emissions that have happened when making the materials for the we use the word carbon for like money. I mean, you can save money, you can spend money. Carbon is a token like that. You can emit carbon, you can draw back and absorb and store carbon. So I think there are many possibilities for misunderstandings when we use the word carbon.
Mariana, thank you. That's a great example that how to use, you can emit the carbon or you can store the carbon. So it's like, the currency you are spending what you are saving, right? And then for the embodied carbon, it's a notion of calculating how much you spend on carbon. So it's always a comparison of like versus reinforced concrete, structure, or the wooden structure, and who's spending more. Thank you.
That would be actually lovely connected to Balsam. And how are you doing this in the design world? You have big architecture and structural engineering functions. So how do you see this?
So when we speak about our approach, we focus a lot, as Yuko had mentioned, on operational carbon, but also we're very driven on the embodied carbon. So what does the material equate to in terms of the carbon emissions from the very minute it was extracted as a raw material till it was transported? What's the construction mechanism really that we want to be looking at to make it the most efficient in terms of emissions? And then towards the end of life cycle of that building or that structure that we're working on. So as designers, our role, our duty moving forward is what we do is that we inform our clients as to the different approaches of the different materials and their impact in terms of embodied carbon, their impact, whether it being as sourcing of those materials or the impact of construction mechanisms and supporting of the relevant, let's say, carbon emissions that are related to different construction techniques. And that's where we come in. It's more on the awareness and the advocacy piece, as I've initially mentioned. And we do quantify this. One Click LCA is a great example of tools that we would be using as consultants, and there are others in the market out there. They're very comprehensive tools to support quantifying the embodied carbon reductions and their impact when it comes to what this means for our clients. So just to give you like a quick example, so timber would be, if we were to use timber, would be 0.3 kilograms of CO2 for every kilogram of timber that's being used in the building, versus if you're going for aluminum, it's about 3.5, well, even more, it's about 11.5 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of building material that's actually being used. So you can see the gap, it's about 10 times more, which means that that's where we come in as designers and as consultants to kind of weigh the importance of really going for more sustainable material choices rather than the conventional material choices, and how this could help their buildings, our clients' buildings, become CO2 sinks rather than CO2 emitters.
That is very lovely to hear, and I have a same experience of seeing the kind of power of the engineering companies talking with them in closer to home. Last year we were having a value chain collaboration with NCC and Rumble, which are kind of a Nordic consultancy company and Nordic construction company, and exactly doing this design, comparing the designs and seeing how much can we save in carbon emissions. And there, when you replace the kind of a building main structure with mass timber, you can cut up to 70% of the emissions, which is quite important and kind of shows that the solutions are out there. We just need to educate and get more people on board and being capable of doing this design, because balsam, it's also a skill that not everyone has. But now that we are talking about the wood and really much the kind of forest that sequestrate the carbon, that then it's basically stored in the mass timber element, and it can even substitute something more polluting materials. But on the carbon storage element, Marianne, I would like to, you were the early movers of really turning this, because you said also carbon is a currency, and you are truly kind of connecting it to money. I'm so interested to hear, how has the journey been for you, and what have been the challenges, and maybe, you know, the great wins and important things now that you've been the forerunner on this front?
Yeah, thank you. We focus on engineered carbon removal and storages, so not the biogenic storages where it's in a mangrove forest or kelp or even forest on land. So those biological storage sites are not in our focus, but everything where there is a controlled engineered process that puts the carbon away, that is where we can do mint these carbon removal credits called corks, and then they can be traded between the ones that emit and want to compensate for it, and those that are actually able to do a net negative activity or material that absorbs more carbon than making it emits carbon. And challenges, I think challenge is that when an industry like this is starting, it starts slowly with small steps, and it's not visible, and the ramp up takes a few years, but when it does ramp up, then maybe it surprises everybody. I think Elon Musk has been able to do a couple of those steps, and I think this industry has the potential for that. We are still not very much mainstream, but coming of age, I would say. On success side, we were really lucky to get our first set of rules right. It was 22 companies who came together in 2019 from 6 countries, and put out these rules that what are the requirements that have to be met, how does the quantification have to happen so that it is credible carbon removal. And with that we have from the beginning gained very sort of customers who are forerunners in this. So Microsoft, Shopify, the insurance company Zurich, those are the ones who have seen the world in the same way as we have, that net zero is only possible with residual emissions being removed and stored for durable times. So you need to start developing those tonnages now to then take away your residual emissions.
And how do you see the buildings then? Where can the buildings be the carbon storage?
Yeah, I think buildings are moving a lot of material. I mean, carbon is material. Carbon is a physical atom, and carbon, it's moving, it's logistics, which you in construction industry know very well. So you have the flows, but the flows are currently not net negative. Which part of those material flows could be turned into net negative carbon flows, that they actually absorb more than they emit, quite many. So timber is a good example. There are also other ways, for example, using biochar in urban greenery. That's one of the technologies that we are able to certify already today. And then we have been introduced some very interesting materials for facade panels that mineralize or in other ways absorb or contain the carbon and are net negative in their carbon footprint.
Truly interesting. So we still have a possibility with timber, as we haven't utilized this carbon crediting. We just overall promote the good qualities of this building material. But that kind of, it would open up also that in building design there could be a carbon budget. There could be actually set limits that this building needs to be within certain carbon budget, maximum emissions, maybe minimum limit that there must be some storage element or something. But Balsam, have you kind of played with that idea in the engineering world?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the point of the discussion is that when you're speaking about whole life carbon and you're thinking about offsets, so the more you're using materials that would help you store and reduce your carbon, the better you're able to compensate for any other offsets that you would be actually investing in alternatively. So it's always best to start with this approach whenever possible, which is by using materials that would themselves help you store your carbon, reduce your offsetting, reduce your approach to purchasing potentially carbon offsets from external markets, and then start thinking about renewables, about the whole life cycle approach together from a design perspective.
Yeah, and Juuko, I've understood that you have also explored this carbon storage element in buildings. And I've seen few reference cases where you have interestingly also communicated it. Can you elaborate on that one?
Okay, thank you, Johanna. We've been trying in Japan that for the elementary school or LG caring facility. So that's always like 2-3 stories high, but we are trying non-residential mid to high rise. And then we do already have announced a project in Melbourne, Victoria State in Australia, that's 15 stories high wooden structure, which is a hybrid. And then above 6 stories, that's all wood. And we do in the plan that's about 4,000 cubic meters of timber would be used for construction, and then that would store 3,000 kilograms of 3,000 tons of CO2, and that's as is stored. So and as I mentioned at the very beginning, that before that, building elementary school or something that in timber that is more towards it feels nicer, and then but for these larger and higher non-residential structure that we do communicate with the developers and building owners at how much CO2 is stored, and then how and compared to the reinforced concrete structure that it's about 40% less CO2 emissions. So that's those quantify it carbon is really important for us to communicate with the customers. So that's something already happening in Australia, and also and we do have another project in London, which is 6 stories high, and so there are many more examples coming up, and then I really do hope that it can be introduced in Japan as well. That currently we don't have enough high, taller wooden structure in Japan yet.
Yeah, but it is amazing where mass timber can go, that we can do multi-story residential, multi-story offices nowadays, and then that can really have an impact. We ourselves at Stora Enso have an example. Our new headquarters is under construction in Helsinki, Finland, and it will be naturally mass timber building. We are tenant there, so it's a investment by pension fund. And we calculated just also the kind of carbon storage element there, and it will be 7,400 tons of CO2 that is stored. It's going to be big building, hosting also a hotel and restaurants, so not only us, but it shows the magnitude that can be done in a single building level. And then when you think about it on the city level, what could be achieved and how much the cities and buildings could really truly be carbon storage and help us now that we urgently need to get things moving, while same time of course focusing on the emission cuts. So I'm not trying to take any away from that, and we are working hard ourselves to kind of cut our small existing emissions from operations, because it's truly important. But this carbon storage element seems to be something to also explore a bit further. Marianne, do you want to how has it been to work with construction, and any kind of wishes for our value chain in this carbon storage and carbon crediting?
Yeah, we have worked for quite some time with the carbon industry. So the 3 first industries we started working with were biochar making, which is related to biomass quite often from agriculture. So farmers and food production, then construction, and also this kind of industrial mineralization, which is very sort of small pilots. And from those 3 industries, carbon industry has been most advanced with your understanding of emissions and storages, your environmental footprints. So we require this EPD or LCA calculation as evidence to our crediting. Construction industry has mainly had it already, so it's a good stepping stone then to calculate the net from the value chains. So, and also this large material flows, the world is not going to stop building. On the contrary, more and more people are moving to urban areas. And when a carbon is stored in a building, it's insured. There is fire protection, there is everything to protect the building and at the same time the carbon storage, which is not the same case. For example, natural forests, they are harder to guard as a carbon storage. So I think the construction industry has very many elements that are favoring understanding of the carbon mathematics.
That's
Johanna?
Yes.
Hi, sorry, that if I mentioned that, and as you know, Mariana talked about the carbon credit, that the project that I talked about in Melbourne and Australia that I mentioned about it, 40% less CO2 emission, but the building is trying to be the first net zero carbon building in Australia, but it can only be realized that using the carbon offsets, using the carbon credit. So and then in Australia, there's already the carbon neutral standard for buildings. So these kind of, standard or the building code is of course very important. And at the same time, that what kind of building construction material we choose, and also in combination with the carbon credit, and then we can offset to make it to net zero carbon building. So I think that what Mariana mentioned is really important for the construction sector, and then using those scheme that all the building owners, all the developers can start thinking of how to make these net zero carbon buildings.
That is very good point. And I've understood that the kind of design life cycle of the building also has a connection here. So Yuko, you've been mentioning the building code, and we've seen that sometimes buildings are, in my area, typically designed for 50 years lifespan. We know that they live longer, but that's the kind of design and life cycle analysis calculation. Luckily, for example, this new headquarter of ours that I mentioned, where Stora Enso will move, that building is in such a central location that it is even in the building code already that it is designed for 100 years. So definitely then meeting even the most strictest approach for carbon storage thinking. What about then if we look even further? I think I'm already touching a little bit the topic there, but this, and Marianne, you already said how buildings are permanent, and you can also kind of measure and see that, okay, it is still there, which kind of gives the creditability into the things. But then circularity opens even more opportunities to secure that it really stays stored in the material. So I know construction industry hasn't been maybe always the best with circularity, but anything that you are exploring on this front, or any comments, Balsam or Yuko, anything from circularity?
I'll go on this one first. So when we think about the circular economy, we think about a way to mimic really the natural world, because the importance of it is that you do see the outputs of some system do service as the inputs of other systems. And that's the importance of really investing in the circular economy principle and prioritizing the circular economy principle, where we would be looking at how to use materials when they reach their end of life, and how to maybe break them down or to reuse them in a sense or another to service as the inputs for other processes. And that's where when you start integrating innovation and circular business models through shared economies, through circular supplies, through resource recovery, so there's the example that I've just given, sometimes also integrating data-driven approaches into expanding and extending the product life is also very important. Sharing platforms, products as a service, all of this simultaneously together to ensure that we are reducing the embodied carbon emissions as much as possible, and extending the reuse of materials and the benefits of materials through the circular economy principle that we are to push forward for.
Thank you. Yuko, did you want to comment on this?
Right, circularity always is a difficult topic for me, that as the lifespan of building is always so long. So whenever who built the existing building 50 years ago, nobody thought about this, circularity and how to, reuse the building structure, construction material. So that's one thing. That's how the construction sector has not been so good at, circularity, because the lifespan is so long. But when we do start constructing new buildings from now on, that we can think of, something that Balsam mentioned, that what we can, try. So it's all new things. And also that the other circularity difficulties I'm always facing is that for the timber is always this cascading use, and then we always try to reuse, recycle within the and the manufacturing site, and then for the residual we use for the next say particle board or next material, or to burn in the biomass, power plant, and then to make it as an energy. So when it comes to timber, that there is sort of no material to material cycle, but in the end, after the cascading use, and also as Balsam mentioned, that extending the usage, and then in the end there's always you burn, and then so we do believe that the carbon or the CO2 emitted in the biomass power plants, then I think the new seedlings can absorb the CO2 and then make it to a new material for the point to grow the tree. So that's a long lifespan of the recycle. But I'm still having a difficulty how to make it into a system, and so that it can be, I would just say, ensure that in 60 years or 100 years to come, and then what happens after 100 years. So
it's
I'm still
long time to,
right.
to invest.
Right.
That is so true. We are exploring quite many digital solutions there too. I think we are all touching these digital material passports, and also the kind of building design, that there is always the digital bank of the building information, which then enables also hopefully at the end of this super long life time, the expansion and reuse and utilization. And it's been, Yuka, so wonderful that you've been talking about the forest sector so much, because it's kind of, we share it very similarly. Stora Enso is also one of the biggest private forest owners in the world, so we truly have the connection straight from this renewable material in a sustainably managed forest into the building material that stays in the use for this very, very long time and stores the carbon for this time. So it's quite amazing material. I'm happy to see that I'm not alone when telling the good sides about it. What about then, I see that we are kind of coming closer to end of our panel discussion, and I promised some time for questions. So maybe the final closing words, what are the key messages that you want to shout out in COP27 for people? Should we go quite random order? Marianne, you've been led to be silent for some time. I think time to poke you.
Thanks, Johanna. So for closing words, we want to promote the idea that, in simply put, it's called like for like, that the fossil emissions would be linked to carbon removal. Start with the emission allowances. Very many governments already have an emission allowance system, but that proceeds or income collected with those allowances are not directly linked to carbon removal and paying for carbon removal and storage. We would like that link to be made, so that it starts with a minimum and maximum quota, that those that are obliged to get emission allowances would be obliged to get a small amount of that for carbon removal and storages in engineered, durable, over 100-year, 1,000-year or 10,000-year storages, so that industry grows to the scale of 10 gigatons that the world needs.
And then I hand over to Yuko for final words.
Thank you, Johanna. And I think that forest has a long life cycle. It takes 80 years for the Japanese cypress to grow for the full, maturity. So we always think on a longer term, and for the longer term sustainability, that's embedded in our DNA. So we really do believe in this, timber as a natural resource, and then it's a renewable resource. And then we really believe that for the construction sector to utilize this timber and wood, the forest resources. And then, as Johanna mentioned at the very beginning, that we have to act now. There has to be so much things to be done by 2030. So we don't, of course, we want to, explore what's going to happen with a new technology in 10 years, 15 years, but we have to act now, and the solution is already here. So we really hope to work closely with other partners, and then with many other different industries, or with many other different regions of the world, and then how we can, standardize this carbon neutral design with the timber. Thank you.
And over to Balsam.
Yes, I would like to build also on what Yuko has just mentioned. And I do think that we are in we have a very short time to act. So we need to act fast. The advantages that we have, all of us here sitting together, is that we have the solutions. We know what needs to be done. We just have to go hand in hand and start implementing those solutions. They are affordable, workable solutions that we've spoken of in today's panel, and they are solutions that can easily be implemented. We just need to have the know-how and start moving forward to implement them. Another important thing that I would like to raise here is awareness. So, and I do think this panel has really come a long way in really helping raise awareness on the importance of the embodied carbon, the carbon storage, and all of the different aspects that have been tackled. And another thing is really how the regulations and how policy can help drive this further, and how incentivizing reduced carbon emissions from the selection of material can also help support this mission even further.
Thank you. So if we are summarizing today's discussion, then multiple perspectives from the construction value chain, focusing on the really mass timber as the solution that provides basically forests when growing, sequestrating, then the substitution effect of choosing this material, and then the storage element, so triple superpower. And then also very good to hear how it, living already in some construction companies, how designers are taking this on board. Balsam, what you said about awareness raising, it is so important, because we need this knowledge and we need the design capabilities to make it happen. So extremely happy that we had this panel discussion today. I think it's only beginning in that sense that the dialogue will continue. And thank you for everyone who joined to listen in, and I wish you great continuous day. And here in the room we open for the questions or comments if there are any. And I can see a hand up, so I will pass on the mic.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting discussion, and hope you can see us also online. I'm Roland with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We're a global CEO-led organization, and Sumitomo and Stora Enso, you're very active members. And we are working on this whole life carbon understanding. We issued case studies where we really look at all the emissions, because we need to understand them. And now we're involved with many other organizations in standardizing whole life carbon. We see that as a key barrier because there's still differences in how people understand it. And my question to you was, do you see this standardization as one of the key barriers? If so, what do we need to do to overcome that? Do you also see other barriers in the, obviously, interactions along the value chain that we really get to reducing those whole life carbon emissions?
Thank you for the question. And do I see, maybe I start boldly here. So I think the building codes are one of the keys that Yuko has been already raising, and overall standardization always helps. So I'm not sure what is the barrier other than getting all the right people together, and that's why we are so happy to collaborate in your platform to get the voices together, get all the material, construction material industries together, and really talk about this. So I think it is this collaboration that is strongly needed, and then if anyone figures out how to accelerate this, I think we are all who are there are already wanting it, but how can we really drive this, that we wouldn't be on this highway to hell with the accelerator on, but rather actually the opposite side and have the movement. Any comments from others?
Oh, hi, Laurent. Nice meeting you virtually. And yes, and another barrier is that at least here in Japan is a cost. I think because there is no standardized code or standardized building materials for the say for mass timber. So that's currently that if you compare that the cost of building the same size with a concrete reinforced concrete, which is a traditional way, and then there are many examples already exist, and then there are many architecture offices that can do that. But if you try to build something with timber, that you need a special assistance, and then you have to go through special and whatever the process to get the permission. So, and for the process, and also for the construction material wise, and the cost is an issue still. So standardized code, and also for the building construction materials, I think it helps a lot to speed up for the prevalence of the wood structure.
I would just like to add to this, if I may, that there's also like different levels of maturity of the different markets when it comes to materials with environmental product declarations, etc. So you do see, because we operate in like so many countries, we do see this really vary a lot. So that's a big challenge that's being faced. And that's, to Yuka's point, that's where the cost plays a big role, because it does become much more expensive to import that environmentally friendly material from somewhere else rather than it being within the local or regional market. So this is what we can maybe work on moving further, is to have more market maturity in terms of more sustainable product choices that would be available for designers, for contractors, and for our clients.
I'm looking at it very much from outside of your industry. I see the norms I've heard about even from outside of the industry. So changing something which has a long tradition, it's encoded in so many places mentally and also in the standards, that's certainly one thing. But two other things I see is the decision point. When is the material decision choice made? And that's so early, and I don't think those people have been reached the awareness that you are actually deciding a very big global thing when you decide for material flows of millions of tons. So I think they don't realize the power they have. And the other one is the cost. You mentioned that it is more costly. If the carbon had the true price for example, the traditional materials, our corks, so the durable carbon removal, they are sold by our projects, or the projects that have these certificates or credits. The price is from $100 and up to $300. So if that, you would do a shadow calculation of what the emissions of the substitute that you are replacing with timber would be with the real carbon removal price, that would not maybe change the economics, what is cheaper and what is more expensive.
And now I'm just too tempted to say, so this is also why we are trying to make it super easy. So in storaenso.com you can find building concepts that are ready-made designs optimized for mass timber that kind of would make the adaptation a little bit faster. And we just launched Sylva by Stora Enso floors and walls, and so that elementing and making it very much easier and standardized would make it so much more efficient and usable. So I know this is not commercial place. We are in COP27 where it's all about saving the world, but now you kind of just somehow pushed me to say that out loud here at the end. But thank you. We have one more question here in the room, so we are pushing the time limits a little bit.
Thanks. I'll keep it pretty quick. Ross Hampton, I'm the chair of FAO's Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries, and Yuko and I were in Rome only a few weeks ago, where we launched a report saying that we're going to need a lot more timber to do all of this good stuff. So the question for the panel really is, there are all of the questions that have been raised today are probably on their way to being solved. It's going to be harder with some and easier with others. The question that we're not hearing being solved at the moment is, where is the sustainable supply going to come from? And especially as Thuven Institute recently said, in Europe, the biodiversity regulations, well intended, are likely to reduce timber supply in Europe by between 9 and 48%, and that'll flow over to poor consequences in Southeast Asia and the middle of Africa. So I'm not sure how much time there is, Chair, but are we grappling with supply to do all this great building?
And maybe I take that one. For Stora Enso, we have forest assets in Scandinavia, and our main basically wood supply comes from Scandinavia and Central Europe. So there, the importance is that you always plant more than you harvest, and that way you have the steady supply and you can keep it sustainable, and it comes from sustainably managed forest and really knowing the value chain, because it is super important. There was also a study by totally independent from us, published maybe 2 months ago, where there was a big global look at this. The researchers had looked at the growth of mass timber and look of land use, and it anyway looked promising. I don't say that globally there wouldn't be, challenges that need to be managed, but very much the kind of solution, the positive side is so much bigger with the carbon storage that the cities could be. So I think traceability, knowing where it comes, really having sustainable forest management, those are the keys to have the availability of the material. And Hugo, as you were mentioning, the cascading use of wood is super important.
Right. May I add that, hi Ross, that if the value of timber or the wood products has a higher value, and by recognize its how would you say, true value, and then there's many more, how would you say, incentives for the forest landowners to invest and try to push even harder for the sustainable management of the forest. So I do believe that, if the world recognizes more of the timber value, and then there's even more chance for the sustainably managed timber from sustainably managed forest will be on the market. So I think it's very important that it goes hand in hand. And so yes, I do believe in that there's enough materials. Yes, it will come out to the market.
That's a good place to, that yes, there is enough. I like that one. And then now it's the call for action, that the solutions are out there. You have heard multiple sides of it today. So really the time to act, and it's painfully aware of it. So encouraging everyone to join the movement to cut the emissions and decarbonize construction sector. Thank you for joining today. We will close our panel from here.